The planet Seraphis was a jewel in the dark expanse of the galaxy. Its towering spires shimmered like crystal, reflecting the pale light of its 3 suns, and the air was thick with the hum of advanced technology intertwined with beauty that seemed almost magical. Here the Aurelians ruled, a race known for their elegance, intelligence, and centuries of unbroken tradition. Their civilization was built on perfection, each citizen expected to maintain the honor of the bloodline and follow the ancient ways laid down by their ancestors. In the heart of Seraphis's capital, the royal palace rose higher than any building on the planet. It was carved from white stone and infused with a faint blue glow, a testament to Aurelian engineering and artistry. Here, the youngest princess, Arya, roamed the marble halls with curiosity and a mind sharper than most adults around her. She was the daughter of Princess Leora, a woman admired for both her beauty and her wisdom, and though Arya was young, her intelligence had already begun to challenge the assumptions of her tutors. Today was a special day. The palace was preparing for a grand ceremonial gathering, an event held once in a generation. Potential royal partners for Arya's future, chosen from noble houses across the galaxy, would be presented. The event was more than a celebration. It was a test of bloodline, tradition, and loyalty. Arya, despite her tender age, understood the weight of it. She had been taught since birth that her choices would shape the destiny of her people. Yet, as the palace buzzed with activity, there was one figure who did not belong in the usual pattern of perfection: Caden. He was a human envoy from Earth, sent to Seraphis as part of a cultural exchange program. Humans were a rare sight here, often regarded as primitive, clumsy, and unpredictable, while Aurelians moved with grace, speaking in careful tones and executing their every action with precision. Humans were messy. Their emotions were raw, their reactions impulsive, and their curiosity boundless. Caden himself was aware of the judgments that followed him. He had been trained to navigate formalities, but no amount of training could mask the fact that he was human. His hair was untidy, his posture relaxed rather than perfect, and his voice carried the subtle tremor of someone unaccustomed to the rigid discipline of Aurelian etiquette. He carried with him simple tools, devices, and artifacts from Earth, items designed to solve problems creatively rather than elegantly. And though some of the nobles snickered at his awkward manners, there was a spark in him, a quiet confidence that refused to be dimmed. Arya noticed this spark almost immediately. While other young nobles were rehearsing lines of greeting, practicing gestures of courtesy, and practicing the correct way to hold their ceremonial robes, Arya found herself drawn to Caden's corner. He was organizing a small set of devices on a table, muttering to himself in a language that hummed with energy and curiosity. The child paused, hiding behind a carved pillar, and watched him work. "What are you doing?" she asked, stepping into the room quietly. Caden looked up, startled, and smiled gently. "I'm trying to understand how this works. It's an Earth device, a little like a puzzle."
I'm seeing if it can help with the energy patterns in your palace lights." Arya's eyes widened.
She had never thought of lights as puzzles before. Her tutors had taught her the science of energy and light in theory. But Caden's approach was different. He examined the device, tapped it in ways she had never considered, and spoke aloud about what might happen if the energy flowed differently. "Why do you do it that way?" she asked. Caden shrugged, still smiling. "Because sometimes the rules aren't enough. You have to think differently."
"If you only follow the rules, you might miss something important."
Arya frowned slightly. This was a thought her tutors would never allow. Rules were everything in Aurelian society, especially for royalty. To challenge them, even in thought, was dangerous. And yet, she found herself intrigued. Something about Caden's simplicity, his willingness to explore, and the way he treated the problem like a challenge rather than a command, made her heart race with excitement. Over the next few hours, Arya found herself slipping away from her lessons and wandering toward Caden's quarters. She asked questions, curious about Earth, about humans, and about the way they solved problems. She asked why humans risked themselves for each other, why they laughed when things went wrong, and why they didn't seem to fear failure as much as Aurelians did. Caden answered each question with patience, explaining with examples that made her see a new perspective. "You see, Princess," he said one afternoon, "humans make mistakes. We fail often, but every time we fail, we learn.
Every time we get hurt, we grow. That's how we survive.
That's how we become better. And sometimes, when you face something impossible, the only way forward is to take a chance that nobody else would dare." Arya thought about this carefully. It was different from everything she had been taught. On Seraphis, perfection was expected. Mistakes were punished, failure was shameful, and courage was measured by adherence to tradition. And yet, here was a human, standing calmly amidst chaos, speaking of courage in ways she could understand. Her fascination with Caden did not go unnoticed. The palace staff whispered to each other, worried about the child's interest in someone outside the royal bloodline. Rumors traveled fast, and the Aurelians prided themselves on controlling every detail of their social structure. A human, they thought, could never influence the royal lineage. And yet, Arya was different. Even at her age, she had a mind that could see value beyond appearances, intelligence beyond pedigree, and courage beyond tradition. The day of the ceremonial gathering arrived. The palace halls were filled with nobles in ornate robes, their hair and movements meticulously styled. Guests from across the galaxy had traveled to witness the event. Arya was dressed in ceremonial attire herself, a gown that shimmered like the stars reflected on Seraphis. Her eyes, however, were not on the nobles around her. They were on Caden, who had been allowed to attend as a cultural observer. The ceremony began with the presentation of the royal heirs, each demonstrating their knowledge, grace, and skill. The audience clapped politely, murmuring their approval. And yet, when it came time for the young princesses to perform a task designed to test their intellect and precision, a subtle problem occurred. One of the energy manipulators malfunctioned, a device meant to create a flawless display of light and power for the court. Panic spread among the nobles. Arya watched Caden carefully. Without hesitation, he stepped forward, examining the device with his unusual perspective. His hands moved quickly, improvising tools and methods that no Aurelian had considered. He spoke aloud, reasoning, calculating, and adjusting the energy flow with intuition rather than strict protocol. Slowly, the malfunction began to stabilize. Lights flickered, patterns corrected themselves, and what could have been a public disaster transformed into a flawless display. The court gasped. The perfection of the event had been maintained, but not by any royal heir. It had been a human who had saved the day. Arya's eyes sparkled with admiration. In that moment, she understood what her heart had already sensed. Caden's courage, creativity, and resolve were more valuable than any tradition. After the ceremony, the other children returned to their lessons, whispering among themselves about the unusual performance. Arya, however, lingered. She approached Caden and asked a simple, direct question. "Why didn't anyone teach you how to do that?" Caden smiled, his eyes reflecting the glow of the palace lights. "Because no one could. I had to figure it out myself. Sometimes, Princess, that's the only way to learn."
Arya nodded thoughtfully.
She could feel something stirring inside her, a recognition of a new path, a new way of thinking that went beyond bloodlines, rules, and traditions. For the first time, she understood that courage and wisdom were not inherited. They were chosen. As the suns of Seraphis began to set, casting long shadows across the marble floors, Arya sat quietly in Caden's quarters, observing the human as he tinkered with his devices. She realized that she was learning something far more important than the lessons taught by her tutors. She was learning to see the world differently, to value heart and ingenuity over lineage, and to understand that humans, though imperfect, had a spark that the Aurelians had long forgotten. The day ended with the palace quiet once more. Servants cleaned the halls, the nobles retired to their quarters, and the young princess returned to her chambers. But Arya could not sleep. She thought of Caden, of his simple honesty, his courage in the face of chaos, and the way he had taught her to question the world politely, but firmly. In her mind, she made a quiet promise. One day, she would make a choice, not one dictated by tradition, not one dictated by expectation, but one guided by her heart. And in that choice, humans would have a place. For now, she only smiled, knowing that the first seed had been planted, a seed that could grow into a future where courage, intelligence, and compassion mattered more than golden blood or centuries of tradition. And deep in the heart of the palace, amidst the quiet hum of Seraphis at night, a human named Caden tinkered and laughed softly, unaware that he had already begun to change the destiny of a royal child, and perhaps, in time, the fate of an entire civilization. The days after the ceremonial gathering were unusually quiet in the palace. The halls, normally filled with the chatter of tutors, servants, and young nobles, seemed almost empty, as though the events of that day had left a lingering hush. Princess Arya wandered through her chambers in the marble corridors with a mind that could not rest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Caden's calm face as he had solved the energy puzzle during the ceremony. His hands, moving confidently yet simply, had made things work where perfection had failed. Arya had always been curious, even for an Aurelian child. She loved learning the intricacies of energy manipulation, history, and diplomacy, but Caden had shown her something entirely different. Humans, she realized, did not simply follow instructions. They created new ways, adapted, and risked failure to achieve something extraordinary. It fascinated her, and she could not stop thinking about it. Meanwhile, Caden continued his quiet work in the palace, largely ignored by the other nobles. They whispered behind closed doors about the humans' presence, questioning why Princess Arya had been allowed to spend so much time with him. In their eyes, humans were unpredictable and unworthy of royal attention. Yet Caden seemed unaffected. He carried himself with a calm assurance, moving between tasks with quiet purpose. One afternoon, Arya decided she could not wait any longer. She slipped away from her lessons, evading her tutors who were preoccupied with preparing for the next ceremonial training. She found Caden in his small workshop, tinkering with a device that hummed faintly with energy.
"Why do you keep working when everyone ignores you?" she asked, stepping inside. Caden looked up and smiled.
Because work doesn't care about who watches. If you want to understand something, you focus on it, not on what others think. Arya tilted her head. It was a simple idea, yet it felt revolutionary. The Aurelians were taught to always consider appearances, to act in ways that reflected their family's honor. But Caden's words were different. They carried freedom, a freedom Arya had never known. "Can I help?" she asked cautiously. Caden chuckled. "Of course, everyone can help. But remember, it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about understanding, trying, and learning from mistakes."
Arya nodded solemnly. She was used to lessons where every answer had to be right, every gesture exact.
But here she felt she could explore, experiment, and even fail without fear. The thought thrilled her. For the next several days, Arya spent her time with Caden, learning to see the world through human eyes. He taught her how to look for solutions where others only saw problems, how to trust intuition, and how to approach challenges with creativity. He did not scold her when she failed, nor did he praise her only for success. Instead, he guided her, helping her think differently and encouraging her to ask questions. "You see, Princess," Caden said one evening, "humans survive because we adapt. We don't rely on rules alone. We don't expect life to be perfect, and most importantly, we care for each other. That care drives us to act, even when it's dangerous or uncertain." Arya's eyes widened. "You care for people who aren't even your family?" Caden nodded. "Family isn't just blood. Sometimes it's the people you choose to protect, the ones you risk for, the ones you help, simply because it's right." Arya thought about the nobles who surrounded her, all carefully maintaining appearances and following tradition. They were bound by rules and expectations, yet they often seemed distant, concerned more with prestige than with the well-being of others. Caden's words made her heart stir. Perhaps there was more to the world than what she had been taught. The palace soon announced another ceremonial event, one that would test not only the intellect of the young heirs, but also their creativity and courage. This trial involved the manipulation of energy flows, an intricate puzzle that could only be solved by understanding both the science and the artistry of power. The young nobles were excited, preparing themselves to demonstrate their superiority. They practiced diligently, following every rule and guideline taught by their tutors. Arya, however, felt differently. She had learned from Caden that understanding could not always come from books and instructions alone. She began thinking of ways to approach the trial creatively, inspired by the humans' methods. She sketched diagrams, experimented quietly, and considered solutions that her tutors would have immediately dismissed. On the day of the trial, the grand hall of the palace was filled with energy and tension. The young nobles lined up, their robes gleaming, their expressions focused and proud. Princess Arya stood among them, calm but alert. She had not rehearsed every step like the others, nor had she memorized every guideline. Instead, she had observed, questioned, and experimented, guided by the lessons she had learned from Caden. When the trial began, the young nobles approached their stations. Energy devices hummed, lights flickered, and the air crackled with power. At first, everything seemed normal. The Aurelians, trained for precision, followed the steps flawlessly. But soon, a subtle malfunction occurred. An energy stream began to fluctuate unpredictably, threatening to destabilize the entire system. Gasps filled the hall as tutors and nobles watched in alarm. Arya's heart raced, but she did not panic. She looked toward Caden, who had been allowed to observe as a human envoy, and saw him analyzing the situation with quiet intensity. He gestured subtly, encouraging her to think differently. Taking a deep breath, Arya adjusted the energy flow, not according to the exact steps her tutors had taught, but in a way that made sense to her. She combined her Aurelian knowledge with the human-inspired creativity she had learned. Slowly, the system stabilized. The fluctuating energy flows balanced. Lights synchronized, and the devices worked as intended. A stunned silence fell over the hall. No royal heir had solved the problem this way. All eyes turned toward Arya, and then, gradually, toward Caden, whose calm smile revealed no surprise. The human had not interfered. He had simply guided the princess's thinking, allowing her to succeed on her own. Arya felt a sense of triumph, but also a quiet understanding. This victory was not just hers. It was a lesson in the value of courage, creativity, and trust. She realized that humans, though underestimated, possessed qualities that could surpass even the most refined Aurelian training. After the trial, tutors whispered among themselves, unsure how to react. Some were proud of Arya's success, but many were uneasy. Tradition had been challenged, and the princess had not followed the expected path. A human had influenced her thinking, and that idea alone was unsettling to the conservative nobles. Arya, however, did not care about their whispers. She approached Caden privately, her eyes bright with excitement. "You were right," she said. "Sometimes rules aren't enough. Sometimes you have to think differently to succeed." Caden smiled warmly.
"I'm glad you see that."
"The world is bigger than we are taught, and sometimes the smallest choices make the biggest difference." Arya nodded thoughtfully. She understood now that her curiosity, combined with the human perspective, had allowed her to achieve something extraordinary. It was not enough to follow instructions blindly. Understanding and creativity were equally important. She also realized that humans, though different, could teach lessons that no Aurelian tutor ever could. As the days passed, Arya's bond with Caden grew stronger. She began to see the world in new ways, questioning assumptions and exploring ideas beyond the rigid structures of her society. She learned patience, resilience, and the importance of seeing potential in unexpected places. Her tutors noticed a change in her thinking, though they did not fully understand it. The child, who had once been quiet and obedient, was now bold, curious, and unafraid to explore new ideas. One evening, as the twin moons of Seraphis rose over the palace, Arya sat with Caden in his workshop. He was adjusting a small device that emitted soft, pulsing light, and she watched him with admiration.
"Why do you care so much about teaching me?"
she asked. Caden paused and looked at her seriously. "Because I believe in potential. You have a mind that can see beyond limits. Most people are trapped by tradition, by fear, by expectation. But you can choose to be different. And when someone shows you the way, it's only fair to follow it and learn." Arya thought about that carefully. She realized that her future would not be defined solely by her bloodline, her royal title, or the expectations of the court. She could choose her path, guided by wisdom, courage, and the lessons she learned from humans like Caden. The next morning, Arya returned to her lessons, but she did so with a new perspective. She observed her tutors critically, questioned assumptions politely but firmly, and began to experiment with solutions to problems that had long seemed impossible. Her peers watched with curiosity, some envious, others skeptical, but Arya paid them little attention. She had discovered a new way of thinking, one that valued heart, creativity, and intelligence over tradition alone. By the end of the week, whispers of the trial's outcome had spread throughout the palace. Many nobles were impressed, though some remained wary. The fact that a human had indirectly contributed to the success of a royal heir was difficult for them to accept. Yet Arya did not care. She had learned something far more important. Humans, though underestimated, had the power to inspire, teach, and change the way even a royal princess saw the world. As she lay in her chambers that night, staring at the glowing ceiling that reflected the stars outside, Arya felt a quiet certainty. She understood that the lessons she had learned from Caden were only the beginning. The future held challenges, trials, and decisions that would test her in ways she could not yet imagine. But now she knew she could face them with courage, creativity, and the understanding that sometimes those who seem small or different could teach the greatest lessons of all. And somewhere in the palace, Caden worked late into the night, unaware that his presence had already begun to reshape the mind of a princess, and perhaps, in time, the destiny of her entire world. The following weeks brought a sense of tension and excitement to the palace that even Arya could feel in her bones. Word of the young princess's unusual success in the ceremonial trial had spread throughout the halls, reaching every tutor, noble, and servant. While some whispered admiration, others muttered quietly about the audacity of a child who had followed the guidance of a human rather than the careful teachings of her tutors. Arya herself remained calm, though her mind was far from still. She had learned so much from Caden, but she also knew that a greater test was coming, the grand trial, one that would challenge every royal heir in intelligence, courage, and creativity, was approaching. This trial was a tradition older than memory, designed to ensure that only the most capable individuals would lead and make decisions for the future of the Aurelian people. The rules were strict, the expectations immense, and the failure was something that could bring shame not only to the individual, but to the family they represented. The palace chambers were quiet in the early morning when Arya slipped away once again to find Caden. She found him tinkering with a device that hummed softly, the kind of human-made tools she had come to love. "Caden," she whispered, "the big trial is tomorrow. I don't know if I can do it perfectly like everyone expects. What if I fail?"
Caden looked up, his eyes calm and kind. "Arya, it's not about being perfect."
That's what they expect. But you've
Learned something they haven't. You know how to think differently, how to see possibilities where others see limits.
don't worry about their rules. Worry about what you can do with what you know.
Arya nodded slowly. His words reassured her, yet a small flutter of nerves remained. She knew the stakes were high. This was not just another demonstration. The grand trial would be observed by the highest council of Aurelians, nobles from every corner of Seraphis, and even distant planetary delegations. Every mistake would be noted, every success magnified. The morning of the trial arrived, bright and glowing under the twin suns of Seraphis. The grand hall was alive with activity, the energy of anticipation crackling in the air. Devices designed to test the young heirs were positioned across the marble floor. Each challenge involved energy manipulation, strategic thinking, and a demonstration of leadership. It was a spectacle of skill, intelligence, and tradition. Arya approached her station calmly. Taking a deep breath, she looked across the hall at the other heirs, their robes gleaming, their expressions proud and confident. Some glanced at her with curiosity, others with disdain. They had heard the whispers of her previous success, and many believed it had been a lucky accident. Kaden, allowed to observe as a human envoy, gave her a subtle nod. It was a small gesture, but it filled Arya with courage. She understood now that luck had nothing to do with her past success. It had been skill, creativity, and the willingness to think differently. And that was what would guide her through today. The trial began with a task that seemed simple on the surface: stabilize a complex energy matrix. For most heirs, the solution was routine, based on long-practiced formulas and inherited techniques. But halfway through, the matrix began to fluctuate unpredictably. Energy streams twisted and shifted, threatening to collapse. Panic began to ripple through the hall as tutors whispered urgently, and some heirs faltered, unsure of how to proceed. Arya's heart raced, but she did not panic. She remembered Kaden's lessons: observe, think creatively, and trust your instincts. Instead of following the prescribed methods strictly, she allowed herself to consider alternatives, to adapt, and to combine her Aurelian knowledge with the human-inspired creativity she had learned. Slowly, deliberately, she adjusted the energy flows, connecting circuits in ways that would have seemed unorthodox to anyone trained solely in Aurelian tradition. The other heirs watched, some with confusion, some with disbelief, as the matrix began to stabilize under Arya's careful adjustments. Kaden's calm gaze encouraged her silently, a reminder that courage often required stepping beyond the familiar. The hall fell silent as the energy streams finally aligned perfectly, lights shimmering in harmony, and the matrix hummed steadily. Arya exhaled, her heart pounding in triumph, yet she felt no arrogance. This was not a victory over others. It was a victory over fear, tradition, and doubt. The council of nobles and tutors murmured among themselves. This was unprecedented. Never before had a young princess solved a challenge in such a manner, blending tradition with innovation, discipline with intuition. Some were impressed, though many were hesitant to accept it fully. It challenged the long-held beliefs of the Aurelian elite that only perfect adherence to tradition could bring success. After the Energy Matrix challenge, Arya moved to the next task: a complex series of strategic puzzles designed to test leadership and foresight. Other heirs approached these puzzles with careful calculation, but Arya allowed herself to think freely, to consider ideas that seemed risky, unconventional, or even foolish to her peers. She remembered Kaden's words: "Sometimes the smallest choice can make the biggest difference." Each move she made reflected not only intelligence but also empathy. She considered how her choices might affect others, how collaboration could bring better results, and how courage sometimes meant taking responsibility for outcomes that were uncertain. Slowly, piece by piece, the puzzles fell into place. The other heirs finished as well, but Arya's approach was different. Her solutions demonstrated understanding beyond calculation. They showed creativity, intuition, and a human-inspired courage that the judges could not ignore. When the final task was announced, a challenge meant to test bravery under pressure, Arya's instincts took over completely. She had to navigate a rapidly changing energy field that could have overwhelmed anyone relying solely on tradition and rote knowledge. While some heirs hesitated, waiting for the safest option, Arya acted decisively. She combined careful planning with bold improvisation, weaving through the field in a way that balanced risk with ingenuity. Every step reflected the lessons she had learned from Caden and the human perspective she now valued deeply. At the conclusion, Arya stood calm but resolute. The other heirs looked around, some puzzled, some anxious, realizing that her approach had succeeded where tradition alone might have failed. The council, composed of the most respected minds in Seraphis, deliberated quietly. Their faces betrayed surprise, some curiosity, and a hint of doubt. This young princess had achieved something remarkable, blending Aurelian skill with a distinctly human creativity. After the deliberation, the council spoke. "Princess Arya," the lead noble said, "your performance today has challenged expectations. You have demonstrated intelligence, courage, and insight beyond your years. Your approach was unconventional, yet undeniably effective. You've shown us that greatness can come from thinking differently, and that understanding is not limited to those of pure blood or long training."
Arya felt a thrill of pride but kept her composure.
She understood the deeper significance. Humans, once considered inferior in the eyes of the Aurelians, had qualities worth respecting, qualities that could inspire and teach even the most advanced society. After the council's announcement, Arya found Caden in a quiet corridor. He smiled, his eyes reflecting the soft glow of the palace lights. "You did it," he said simply. Arya shook her head. "No, we did it. I learned from you, and it made all the difference." Caden's smile widened. "I only showed you a path."
You walked it yourself. That night, Arya could not sleep.
She reflected on everything that had happened, the trial, the challenges, the lessons learned from Caden. She realized that her understanding of courage, intelligence, and leadership had changed. She could no longer see the world as a series of rules and expectations. Instead, she saw possibilities, potential, and choices that could shape the future. Over the next few days, the palace continued to buzz with whispers. Some praised Arya's achievements, some doubted them, and some began to question the rigid traditions of the Aurelians themselves. The idea that a human could teach lessons valuable enough to influence a royal heir was revolutionary, unsettling many, yet inspiring others. Arya felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. She had not sought to challenge tradition for its own sake. She had simply embraced what she had learned and allowed it to guide her actions. Caden continued to observe and offer guidance, though always respectfully, never overstepping boundaries. He encouraged Arya to continue thinking freely, to question assumptions, and to value courage and empathy above all else. And as she practiced these lessons, Arya began to see a larger truth. Greatness was not determined by bloodline alone. It was determined by choices, by the courage to act, and by the willingness to embrace what others might overlook. By the time the sun set over Seraphis, Arya felt a sense of calm determination. The trials had tested her, yes, but they had also taught her something far more valuable than victory or recognition. They had shown her the strength of human ingenuity, the power of courage, and the importance of making choices guided by heart and understanding. And somewhere in the quiet halls of the palace, Caden worked late into the night, unaware that his lessons had already begun to reshape the mind of a princess, and, perhaps, the future of her entire world. Arya understood now that the path ahead would not be easy. Tradition would resist change. Critics would doubt her, and yet she felt ready. She had seen the value of thinking differently, of embracing courage, and of seeing potential where others might not. The seed planted weeks ago had begun to grow, and she knew that it would eventually blossom into something extraordinary. For the first time, Arya realized that the smallest acts of learning, the quiet moments of curiosity, and the willingness to trust in the unexpected could change the course of history. She had chosen to see the value in someone others had dismissed, and that choice had transformed her understanding of the world. As the palace slept under the twin moons, Arya gazed out at the horizon. She could feel the stirrings of a future that would be different, a future where courage, creativity, and heart mattered more than golden blood. And in her heart, she knew that the next steps, whatever challenges lay ahead, would test her even further. But now she had learned the most important lesson of all. Greatness comes not from perfection, but from the courage to act with understanding, and the wisdom to see potential where others cannot. The morning sun spilled its light across the grand marble halls of the palace, casting long shadows over the faces of the Aurelians who had gathered for the day's events. The grand trial had concluded days ago, but its consequences still rippled through the corridors like an undercurrent. Some nobles whispered nervously in their chambers, questioning the influence of a human on the youngest princess. Others were intrigued, curious to see how Arya's unconventional methods would continue to shape her thinking and her decisions. Arya herself felt a mixture of anticipation and calm determination. She had learned so much from Caden, yet she knew that the most difficult challenges were still ahead. Today was the day she would be formally asked to make a choice that would define her future, and, by extension, the future of her people. The council had decided that, after observing her performance, she would now face the ceremonial decision: to pledge loyalty and guidance exclusively to a royal mentor of pure blood, as tradition dictated, or to acknowledge someone outside the royal lineage who had influenced her. Someone like Caden. The young princess walked through the palace halls, her robes flowing behind her, her mind focused. She had spent the night thinking about what she wanted, what she valued, and what she had learned. The other heirs were already gathered in the ceremonial chamber, each displaying the poise and grace expected of them. They were all children of noble blood, trained meticulously for this moment. Their eyes briefly flicked toward Arya, some with curiosity, others with judgment. Caden was standing quietly near the back of the chamber. Though his presence was unusual, it had been permitted by the council to observe, a recognition that his guidance had been influential yet non-intrusive. His calm demeanor contrasted sharply with the tense formality of the nobles, but his eyes were warm, giving Arya a subtle encouragement. The chamber doors closed and the head of the council stepped forward. His robes glimmered in the soft morning light, and his face, lined with experience, carried a serious expression. "Princess Arya," he said, his voice echoing through the hall, "you have demonstrated exceptional intelligence, courage, and creativity. Today, you are presented with a choice that will define not only your future, but the future of Seraphis. You may pledge guidance and mentorship to a royal of pure Aurelian blood, as tradition dictates, or recognize an individual who has guided you by their wisdom, courage, and insight, even if they are not of our lineage. The decision is yours." A hush fell over the chamber. Every eye was on Arya. Tutors, nobles, and even distant planetary observers leaned forward slightly, awaiting her words. Arya could feel the weight of their gaze, yet she did not falter. She thought of Caden, of the lessons he had taught her, of the courage, empathy, and ingenuity she had witnessed in him. She thought of the other children whose brilliance was undeniable, but whose thinking was bound by centuries of tradition. Arya stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "I choose." She paused, glancing at Caden. "To recognize someone who has shown me courage, honesty, and understanding. Someone who has taught me that greatness comes from choice and heart, not just from blood."
Gasps filled the chamber. Gasps filled the chamber.
Some nobles froze, eyes wide in shock. Whispers spread like wildfire. Never before had a royal heir chosen to acknowledge someone outside the royal bloodline, let alone a human. The council murmured among themselves, clearly uncertain how to respond. Arya took another step forward. "That person is Caden." The room erupted in astonishment. Some of the older nobles frowned deeply, whispering urgently, while others leaned back, clearly unsure how to respond to this unprecedented decision. Caden himself remained calm, though his eyes reflected both pride and humility. He took a subtle bow, acknowledging the recognition, but did not step forward to claim any authority. One of the senior nobles, a stern woman known for her strict adherence to tradition, stepped forward. "Princess Arya," she said, her voice firm, You are a child.
You have been influenced by one who is not even Aurelian. How can you make such a choice?
Tradition exists for a reason. Bloodline ensures order, loyalty, and stability. To ignore it, to disregard it, could bring chaos. Arya met the noble's gaze, unwavering. I have seen courage and understanding where you did not expect it. I have learned that rules alone do not make a person wise or strong. The lessons I have learned from Caden are just as valuable as the teachings of our tutors. Courage, creativity, and empathy cannot be inherited. They must be chosen. And I choose to recognize them.
The chamber fell into a tense silence.
The council deliberated quietly, their faces a mixture of surprise, admiration, and concern. Many had never imagined a child could speak with such clarity, let alone challenge centuries of tradition with conviction. Arya's words were not rebellious. They were honest, measured, and thoughtful. They carried the weight of observation, experience, and understanding beyond her years. After several long moments, the head of the council stepped forward again. "Princess Arya," he said slowly, "your decision is unprecedented. Yet it is clear that your understanding, insight, and courage have guided you to this choice. While it challenges tradition, it also demonstrates the qualities we value most in our leaders: wisdom, empathy, and courage. Your choice will be recognized." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. Some nobles remained uneasy, reluctant to accept a human's influence on a royal heir. Others began to nod subtly, impressed by the child's clarity and bravery. The younger heirs, who had been silently observing, looked at Arya with a mix of awe and confusion. The realization that a human could teach lessons so valuable and be recognized officially was groundbreaking. Caden approached Arya quietly, his expression calm but proud.
"You've done well," he said softly.
"Not just in the trial, but in standing by what you believe. That takes courage far greater than any test." Arya smiled, feeling a sense of warmth and reassurance. "I could not have done it without your guidance," she admitted. "You showed me that there is more to the world than rules and expectations." The days that followed were filled with a mixture of celebration, tension, and adjustment. Arya's decision had caused ripples throughout the palace and beyond. Some families were outraged, convinced that tradition had been violated. Others were intrigued, recognizing the value of a fresh perspective and the lessons humans could bring. Caden was now officially acknowledged as an advisor and mentor, a status unprecedented for any human in Aurelian history. As the palace adjusted to the new reality, Arya continued her studies and explorations with Caden. She learned not only about human ingenuity but also about courage in action, empathy in decision-making, and the importance of questioning assumptions. Together, they experimented with energy manipulation, creative problem-solving, and strategies that combined the best of human and Aurelian thinking. Despite the challenges from conservative nobles, Arya remained steadfast. She understood that change would not come easily, but she also knew that progress required courage and vision. She saw the potential for humans and Aurelians to work together, to learn from each other, and to create a future in which greatness was defined by action, heart, and understanding, not by blood alone. One evening, as the twin moons of Seraphis rose high over the palace, Arya and Caden walked along the balcony overlooking the city below. The lights of the spires shimmered like stars, reflecting the energy of a civilization on the brink of transformation. "Do you think they will accept this change?" Arya asked quietly. Caden considered for a moment. "Some will, some won't. But the important thing is that you have chosen to act with understanding and courage. Change is never easy, especially when it challenges centuries of tradition. But if you hold to what is right and continue to inspire others, the future will follow."
Arya nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility but also a newfound determination.
She understood that her choice had not only altered her own path, but had begun to reshape the mindset of her people by recognizing value in someone who is different, She had challenged assumptions and opened the door to a future where courage, creativity, and heart were valued above bloodline alone. In the days that followed, Arya's influence began to grow. Nobles who had once doubted her began to see the wisdom in her approach. Tutors began to adjust their lessons, incorporating creativity and critical thinking alongside tradition. And the younger generation of Aurelians began to see humans not as outsiders or inferior beings, but as teachers, allies, and sources of inspiration. Arya knew the road ahead would still be difficult. There would be resistance, misunderstandings, and challenges yet to come. But she had seen the power of choice, courage, and heart. She had learned that greatness was not dictated solely by bloodline or tradition, but by the willingness to act with wisdom and understanding. And she knew that with Caden's guidance, she could continue to grow, inspire, and lead in ways that would forever change the future of Seraphis. As the twin moons cast their glow over the palace that night, Arya stood tall, her mind focused and her heart resolute. She had chosen a path that no Aurelian had ever taken, yet she felt certain it was the right one. Humans, she realized, carried lessons that could transform her world, and in acknowledging them, she had begun to create a future where courage, creativity, and empathy mattered more than any royal bloodline. The palace was quiet now, the halls filled only with the soft hum of energy devices and the distant whispers of the city outside. Caden remained near her side, a quiet presence that reminded her of the lessons she had learned and the potential that lay ahead. Together they would continue to explore, to challenge, and to teach, building a bridge between two worlds that had once seemed so distant. And deep in her heart, Arya knew that the true trial had only just begun. The choice she had made would shape not only her own destiny, but the destiny of her people, and perhaps, one day, the fate of the entire galaxy. The palace of Seraphis was alive with a different energy now, one that buzzed not from tradition or rigid expectation, but from possibility. Word of Princess Arya's unprecedented choice had spread throughout the royal courts, across the noble houses, and even to distant planets. Some greeted it with skepticism, others with curiosity, and a few with quiet hope. The presence of Caden, the human who had guided her, was no longer an anomaly, but a symbol, a sign that courage, ingenuity, and heart could cross boundaries of blood, species, and centuries of tradition. Arya herself felt a mix of excitement and responsibility. She had made a choice that would shape the future, but she knew that action, not words, would define what came next. The trials of intellect, courage, and creativity had shown her what she was capable of. But now she faced the test of leadership. The young princess would have to act in a way that proved her decision was not just symbolic, but meaningful for her people. The first challenge arose sooner than she expected. A delegation from a neighboring system had arrived with a crisis. Their energy grids were failing, threatening entire cities with blackouts and instability. Traditionally, only experienced Aurelian engineers and royal advisors would have been allowed to intervene, but Arya insisted that she, alongside Caden, would lead the effort. The council hesitated, unsure whether a child and a human could succeed where trained specialists were expected, but Arya's calm demeanor and confidence left little room for argument.
"I have learned from both Aurelian knowledge and human creativity," she said firmly.
"We will find a solution. I ask only for your trust." With the council's reluctant approval, Arya and Caden traveled to the neighboring planet. Upon arrival, the scale of the problem became clear. Energy lines sparkled and faltered, systems hummed and groaned, and small fires had started in sections of the city. Engineers moved quickly, following protocols, but traditional methods were proving slow and insufficient. Arya observed quietly, analyzing the situation. She noticed patterns that the engineers overlooked, sequences in the energy fluctuations that suggested an alternative approach. Caden stood beside her, pointing out possibilities she might not consider alone. "Look at it this way," he said. "Humans solve problems by thinking about connections, not just procedures. Try connecting these points differently, but safely." Arya nodded, and with careful but innovative adjustments, she rerouted energy flows in ways the engineers had never considered. Her hands moved with precision, her mind balancing caution with creativity. Sparks flew, lights stabilized, and slowly, systems began to recover. The engineers watched in awe as the child and the human succeeded where rigid procedure had failed. The crisis was resolved, and the city was saved. Word spread quickly, and even the most skeptical nobles began to reconsider their assumptions. Here was a princess who had chosen wisely, and a human whose ingenuity had been proven invaluable. Arya's actions had validated her choice, demonstrating that courage, intelligence, and empathy could transcend tradition. When she returned to Seriphus, the palace buzzed with admiration and cautious respect. Arya's decision was no longer merely a symbolic act, it had proven its worth in action. She received formal recognition from the council, not just as a royal heir, but as a leader in her own right. And Caden, once considered an outsider, was now formally acknowledged as an advisor, his presence a testament to the power of human creativity and courage. Yet Arya knew the work was far from over. The traditions of the Aurelians were deep, and many still resisted change. Some nobles continued to whisper, skeptical of the influence of a human. Others were inspired, quietly adjusting their own thinking to embrace new ideas. Arya understood that leadership meant guiding not only by example but also by patience, persistence, and understanding. The next weeks were filled with collaboration and innovation. Arya and Caden worked together to improve the palace systems, blending human ingenuity with Aurelian precision. Energy grids were optimized, communication networks enhanced, and new educational methods developed for young nobles. Arya encouraged curiosity, experimentation, and empathy in every task, teaching others to value creativity alongside tradition. One evening, as the twin moons of Seriphus hung high in the sky, Arya stood on the palace balcony looking out over the city. The spires sparkled with renewed energy, reflecting the efforts of many hands and minds working together. Caden joined her, silent at first, watching the glow of the lights with satisfaction.
"You've changed everything," he said finally.
Arya shook her head, smiling. "No, we've only begun. Change takes time. But I see now that courage and creativity matter more than tradition alone. And humans can teach lessons no one else can." Caden nodded. "Sometimes it only takes one choice to start something bigger than anyone expects."
Arya turned to him, her eyes bright. "Then we'll keep making those choices, won't we?" "Always," Caden replied.
The following months brought further challenges. A small rebellion erupted in a distant province, fueled by resentment against a rigid class system and the belief that the royal family prioritized tradition over fairness. Traditionally, such uprisings were met with military force and strict punishment, but Arya saw an opportunity to apply the lessons she had learned. Instead of responding with force alone, she and Caden devised a strategy that combined diplomacy, ingenuity, and empathy. They listened to the grievances of the rebels, analyzed the system failures, and implemented solutions that addressed root causes rather than symptoms. Energy networks were improved, trade routes optimized, and local leaders trained in governance and problem-solving. Within weeks, the rebellion ended, not through fear, but through understanding and cooperation. Word of this success spread throughout Seriphus, reinforcing the value of Arya's choice and Caden's guidance. The story of a human teaching a princess, who in turn transformed her people, became legend in hushed whispers and cautious praise. The success did not go unnoticed by the next generation. Young Aurelians began to experiment with new ideas, inspired by Arya's willingness to learn from someone outside their own species. Curiosity, once stifled by tradition, began to flourish. Arya encouraged mentorship programs where humans and Aurelians collaborated, teaching one another new skills and perspectives. Despite all this progress, Arya never allowed herself or her people to grow complacent. She knew that true leadership required constant vigilance, openness to learning, and the courage to act differently when necessary. She continued her lessons with Caden, exploring new technologies, problem-solving methods, and ways to strengthen relationships both within the palace and beyond. One day, as the palace gardens shimmered in the golden light of Seraphis' sons, Arya was approached by the lead council member who had once questioned her choice. The noble bowed, her expression serious but respectful. "Princess Arya," she said, "I admit I doubted the wisdom of your decision. But I have seen its results. You have proven that courage, intelligence, and empathy can come from unexpected places, and that they are more valuable than blood alone. Your guidance has inspired not only the palace but the people of Seraphis. You have changed the way we see the world." Arya smiled gently. "Thank you. I did not do it alone. I learned from someone who showed me that greatness is chosen, not inherited." The noble nodded thoughtfully, her expression softening. "Then perhaps it is time that we teach others the same lesson." As the days passed, Arya's vision for a more inclusive, understanding, and innovative society continued to take shape. Humans were now welcomed as teachers, advisors, and collaborators. Aurelians, once rigid in their traditions, began to embrace creativity, courage, and empathy as core values, alongside precision and knowledge. And through it all, Caden remained by her side, not as a ruler or a noble, but as a guide, mentor, and friend. His presence reminded Arya and her people that greatness could come from any place, any species, and any heart willing to act with courage and understanding. Years later, as Arya herself became the leader of Seraphis, she often reflected on the day she made her choice. She remembered the fear, the anticipation, and the quiet certainty that had guided her hand. She remembered the lessons from Caden, the human who had shown her that courage was more powerful than pedigree, and creativity more lasting than tradition. Under her leadership, Seraphis flourished in ways that no one could have predicted. Its cities shone with innovation, its people thrived with opportunity, and its influence spread across the galaxy, not through force or fear, but through intelligence, empathy, and courage. Arya's choice had changed everything, proving that even a child, guided by heart and wisdom, could shape the destiny of worlds. And somewhere, always quietly, Caden continued to teach, tinker, and guide. He had come from a distant, small planet called Earth, but his influence reached far beyond, reminding all who saw it that humans, though underestimated, could inspire greatness in ways no one else could. The final lesson of Seraphis was clear. Sometimes, the smallest choices, made by the youngest hearts, could change the fate of an entire civilization. And when courage, creativity, and empathy were recognized and valued, even the oldest traditions could evolve into something better, something brighter. Princess Arya, standing on the balcony of her palace as the twin moons cast silver light across the city, understood this completely. She smiled, knowing that the future of her people, and perhaps the galaxy, had been shaped not by fear or blood, but by choice. And in that choice, humans had earned their place among the stars.